In color.
Actually, I was doing the Simpsons intro.
In Technicolor.
I was doing the Simpsons intro, but...
Oh, so we were all on 3 separate pages. I'm just clarifying.
It's fine.
That's
Welcome to the Crash Chords podcast, everybody.
The course.
After 2 weeks of absence because John was a dick and I lost my voice.
Hey, I was not. I had to go to Pennsylvania for a train
Nobody
show.
actually goes to Pennsylvania.
I know. Except for Philly fans.
Nobody actually goes to train shows. Actually, this guy does, and it's kind of awesome.
We
You work
actually-
for trains.
Yes.
It's an expo.
I believe that's come up before.
Every once in a while, you should pitch this. Just an idea.
12,500 people attended.
Whew.
Gee. Holy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Hi.
There's less people in like a 100 square mile area. Because we're in Bumble F. We're in the middle of nowhere when we go out there.
I'm trying to see if that's right. Probably. Maybe. Yeah.
Wait, John was
nobody
right about
there.
something?
You might have actually gotten a statistic marginally correct, depending upon an average of anywhere USA.
I'll put it
A
this
broken
way.
clock is still right twice a day.
I'll put it this way.
There you go.
The area of the county is like between 10 and 20 times the size of Staten Island, and it still only has like half the population.
And what he's trying to say, there's more people at his thing than there are of you out there listening to this thing. So,
We don't actually
really?
know that because
Are
we've
you
never
gonna
actually
let
crunched our
John
numbers.
win? Are you?
Tell your friends. At the top of the show, since we haven't really talked about what we've been listening to in a long time, I do want to bring up that I've been moderately obsessed with Schaefer the Dark Lord's new record, Sick Passenger. The week it came out and the subsequent week after, that's all I listened to. Nothing else. To and from work.
Obsession.
Yes.
By Calvin Klein.
But I really enjoy the record. I'm hoping by next week, me, John, and Steve could talk a little bit about it, because I put it up on the SkyDrive for them to take a gander at. Or listen, because gandering is looking.
We'll gander. We'll gander.
You'll gander.
Don't worry.
I also, at the top of the show, want to give a shout-out to Robbie and Maya, who have been listening since, I don't know, since I recommended the podcast about a month ago or so. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks. No,
Yes.
really. I mean that.
Also, I get to talk about Painless Parker Plugged In. You are so upset you missed it, and you don't even know it. It was so good.
Now I do. Thanks for telling me.
So he first
Now
of all,
he's gonna be upset.
So
You
the-
made
I'm
John
upset.
cry.
so the plugged in
I'm
part.
not crying.
the inside, though.
You only cry for 2 reasons: when a child is born, or when your sports team loses something big.
We're not allowed to talk about sports.
This is a very shallow idea. Sadness.
Painless Parker Plugged In set, which he played on his birthday a few weeks back. His plugged in accoutrements were Robert on bass and Alex Bell of the Wasties on drums. And it's funny. So you guys have seen how Noam dressed and how he shows up. Painless turns up in a, I think it was a CBGB's t-shirt, might have been a Ramones, no, it was a Ramones t-shirt, a leather jacket with buttons on it, jeans, boots,
He came punk.
totally punked out.
That's the thing. He has this punk background, which always seems to be slightly in the closet.
Yeah.
Even though he describes it at length, but then he never really has the image.
Yeah, even
So-
though he's the kind of guy that has a pocket watch, and has a breast pocket to put the pocket watch into.
But
He has mustachios.
but the performance was very awesome. For a brief moment, I felt like I was back in CBGB's minus the smells of vomit, cigarettes, and piss.
Well, you weren't there that late that night.
It was at the way station. The way station never gets that bad.
True.
Anyway, so that show was really great. Another shout out to Painless, because it was really awesome to hear, and I'm hoping he at some point records an album of that version as well. Oh, and he called them. Remember how he talked about Painless Parker was an old dentist, and he took on the name Painless Parker. His band, it was the Painless Parker and the Impacted Molars.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
I
that.
thought you'd appreciate that.
Dental jokes.
Yeah, you like strange jokes. This is not news.
I'm not an anti-dentite. The Seinfeld reference.
Yes, I know.
What is wrong?
With the world today,
No, with Steve in particular.
You knew what I was referencing. That's good.
Of course I did.
Okay, well, let's get into our album for this week. It's John's pick.
Today we are listening to Arctic Monkeys AM, which is actually a blatant ripoff, and they said it themselves, of the Velvet Underground's VU titled album.
Yeah, it's an acronym for themselves. It's exactly that deep.
It's essentially a self-titled record.
The Arctic Monkeys are an indie rock band with leanings towards hard rock, psychedelic rock, alt rock, a little bit of hip hop, a little bit of R&B. They are very much a fusion style band.
I would call them fun for everyone, but they definitely bend the norm.
Yeah. Can't put me in a box, man.
No, you can't.
Well, mostly because it wouldn't fit.
It depends on how thin I slice you.
Let's
Arctic Monkeys have been around for a few years. This is their recent rendition. I haven't heard anything within the last 2-3 years though by them. I do know they have had a few other albums. This was just back in September on, I think, the 6th that came out on.
Okay. Let's get right into the first track. It's called "Do I Wanna Know?" Question mark, because that's important. Which is the intro track to the record. For an intro track, as far as intro tracks go, it was kind of very engaging right off the get. It had a drum backbeat that Steve, and this word's going to come up a lot, Steve defined as hypnotic, which was a good majority of the record, was very hypnotic and engaging. It kind of drew you in.
Now he said it, now I can't say it.
Of course you can say it.
Unbelievable.
This song,
I was going to say it many times.
But now you won't because I said it.
This song is a blood-pumping slow burn. It's a very steady rhythm, very steady song. Does a great job of bringing you up. It also showcases the very freeform style of lyrical singing in this album, what they're known for.
It almost had a rap format to it.
Not
didn't
even. It was pure freeform. Not train
It
of
was.
thought, but pure freeform.
Well, there was a looseness about it because the vamp was so long when you consider it. It's pretty slow, but if you stretch it out over the course of the entire verse, it almost feels meandering in a way. But I kind of like that. It was, to that extent, it was hypnotizing. Yes, not hypnotic at all.
Same thing. But no, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this band is going into it, I mean, we throw around the word indie a lot, and indie, like a few other descriptors, kind of has mixed meanings, doesn't always mean just one thing.
But it's a little more pigeonholed than other words like alt.
But as we started listening to the record, I kind of said, oh, this sound, it's like, the Killers when they were good.
I think it's important to mention at this point that there was, there's a similarity, I feel here, and at first I had just detected it, but it turns out there's a direct connection between this and the same Queens of the Stone Age album that we reviewed like Clockwork back in episode 52. Now, we had some opinions on that, certainly we differed, and the thing is, I feel like in many ways you could describe them as being somewhat in the same genre. Yes, it's true, not that everything they've done is really that similar, but at least in terms of ambition for their most recent projects, like Clockwork and here AM, they seem to be going for something that was still very close to old school rock,
but
at the same time wanted to break out in
kind of turn it on its head
ways.
A little bit.
Exactly. And that's not completely by accident, because the lead singer of Velvet Underground is featured in one of these tracks.
Arctic Monkeys.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Of Queens of the Stone Age
no.
and Arctic Monkeys switched singers.
Velvet Underground will come up a lot
Not
too,
switched,
but yeah, unfortunately.
Showcase
Actually,
each
let's
others.
get that out of the way because there's a bit of news. Lou Reed, the singer of Velvet Underground, has passed away recently.
Yes,
and
within the last week.
Yeah, so there's that. But what I'm trying to say is that Arctic Monkeys and Queens of the Stone Age, their lead singers had both
featured on
respective
album, records,
respectively. The sentence is done.
Yeah, that was the worst sentence I think we've ever tried to all pull out of you.
You
There you
sounded
go.
like spam.
You got it though.
We got it eventually.
You sounded like spam.
Oh, we
So
can hear us,
let's
yeah.
continue to talk about Do I Want to Know, though. So
One line that really struck me, and I want to start talking about this, at the end of the pre-chorus, because this one actually did have a verse, pre-chorus, chorus setup, which is a little bit deviant from what you expect nowadays. The last line of that the nights were mainly made for saying things that you can't say tomorrow day. I like the way that they're building up the theme work in the lyrics. The titles are very descriptive of what they're going to be singing about. Do I Want to Know is about that dark secret of who he's talking to. I really enjoy the way this is personified in the pre-chorus and chorus work.
Yeah, and I think it really pushed itself forward. The pre-chorus specifically really pushed the track forward. Just the way it was alternating between the chorus and then the primary vocalist, the chorus and the primary vocalist, and then it pushes even further when it drops to the chorus, where he's actually just singing along with that vamp that was in the background. So they double each other, which kind of ties it all together. I think it really makes it such a alluring track in that way.
And also what really brings the track together is the backbone of the drum beat, which becomes even more prevalent in the tracks to come. But there's just a steady drum beat.
It's not like there's
the whole
anything
track.
fancy. There's nothing fancy at all. It's completely steady.
Yeah.
That's why you can just zone out on it.
Yeah.
But it does create a creep factor, a disturbing factor that is really within the whole album, and that is with the first rendition of the high-pitched Crawling Back to You. When they start doubling and harmonizing on those lines, on that line specifically, it really does a great job of cutting to the bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all jump in unison with starting off with that line for the chorus. It's yeah, the whole it's got an interesting progression. It's like you said, it's not necessary. It's a little bit deviant, I guess, from what you'd expect. Yeah, not just verse, chorus. The fact that it moves through those three different stages. It's not like we haven't looked at the music, that features a pre-chorus, but
Sure.
it makes it more of a gradual climax.
Well,
and in some sense, the whole track doesn't really climax at all.
Right.
It really is always a step upward.
Well, and also that verse, pre-chorus, chorus structure is prevalent in most of the tracks on this record, whereas with a lot of the other bands we reviewed, a couple of tracks will have that format, but not the whole record.
And it'll primarily be a verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, or bridge, chorus. Very simple.
What have you.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually very simple.
Yeah, there's a few tracks in this album though that are fairly clear cut, and we'll get down there later.
Moving on to track 2, so Are You Mine is where the drums kick up to the next level, and I realize that the drums are going to probably be one of my favorite parts of the record. So this song just has such beautiful drum fills, and it's got this great backbeat that doubles with the bass. There's a lot of bass drum interplay on this whole record.
I don't think I've ever heard a drum fill described as beautiful before. Most people don't think about drums in that way. Most people think, oh yeah, awesome drum fill, or incredible technical drum fill. Not beautiful. It's just kind of a strange choice you chose there.
I thought it was.
It was impressive. It was very impressive. It's actually kind of amazing to consider that between the first track and the second track, you go from this very steady drum beat, and I almost didn't notice the drums, how talented the drummer is in the second track. It's, considering there's such a big difference there, I think it's amazing at how subtle they managed to seep that in.
Yeah.
It's not like overtly we're awesome. It's like, oh yeah, just if you listen to the fills, if you listen closely, they're there.
Yeah.
And that's because of the heavier play on the guitar work. It was really old school psychedelic rocking guitar in this song.
Oh yeah.
And it did it harkened back to Floyd, to just not the near complexity, but the Hendrix style bass guitar that you
name a
expect.
band in Woodstock. And to be honest, there was a live feel to this track in itself.
And
It
that
definitely
that
had
came
that
in,
energy.
That came in with the vocal doublings, and it was really
And the effects
fun.
being placed on the vocals as well.
Yeah, and it was really fun with the chorus work because it wasn't complete doubling. The harmonies were sporadic in nature and really did a good job of accenting the lines, which really brought that emotional desire feel in the song out.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I can't even comment on that.
No, yeah, and it was, like I said, this is the first track you really get that sense of the drum-bass interplay that's going to be prevalent throughout the entire record. It kind of defines the sound of the first half of the record. Is very much in the drums and bass.
Yeah, there's some connectivity there. You notice that immediately, even with the guitar also.
Yeah, the guitar too, yeah.
The vamps had little similarities between the first and second track. Granted, the second track is not as hypnotic, but it's a tied together sound.
Right, and even though the second track isn't as hypnotic as the first, I'd argue that the second track is more engaging because there's more going on.
Exactly.
That's
Just
kind
on a
of
bass
funny
level.
because on the face of it, I don't think you can be any more engaging than something that's hypnotic.
Well, I guess, yeah.
You're not just engaged, you're entrapped.
That's
so,
true.
Well, the story is starting to take a forefront here, and there is some definite theme work being built here.
yeah.
And we'll get into that in a little bit later. But one of my favorite songs is the next track, One for the Road.
So this one, whereas the drum was more prevalent and kind of at the forefront, the bass steps up. From the beginning, the moment the track begins, the bass is very much in the forefront.
Because you got a picking guitar. Not a tapping, not a strumming, a picking. A very clear-cut, dun, 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 kind of a tone to it, which really creates very eerie sounds. Very eerie themes in the song.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff going here at this point. I mean, it's kind of atmospheric. I don't think you could really... That's one thing I don't think you could really describe the Queens of the Stone Age album as. I don't think you could really call that atmospheric. And I hate to make these comparisons necessarily, but I feel it's almost necessary because of the connection here.
Well, also, with these tracks, with the Queens of the Stone Age tracks, there were moments you felt engaged, as if you were in a scene, it was building a mood in a scene. Whereas almost every track on this record, you get steeped in an ambiance of the track. These tracks very much built a scene for you because they were so engaging.
Well, there was a creep factor to that album as well.
Yeah, but this one is even more so, I feel. You're really pulled into this scene.
I think this one is more so, and I think it especially as a whole, like, they may have done it on specific tracks in Like Clockwork.
But on this one, the whole record, especially once you start listening to the lyrics, you really are being pulled into almost a movie-esque kind of scene.
I think what's fascinating to me, and the real success here, I think, over that of the other album, not to compare, but I clearly am, is that I think that it has something to do with how meandering this is. Like, it manages to fill out the same exact idea of that whole, creepy, somewhat off the beaten track nature, and yet it manages to show specific little variations within that framework. Whereas the other track, it's either they went all or nothing.
Yeah.
Their filler tracks would not fit it, with Like Clockwork.
Right.
Here, it's even the filler tracks manage to fill out one aspect of it, however minor.
Right, and also the filler tracks are barely filler because they're not just kind of there and not worth hearing.
Or they're ironic in some way. It's very cleverly done, all things considered.
And all things work to the theme work. And I have to say, One for the Road is really, really doing a good job of almost Muse-like scene setting. I'm going to make that comparison.
I can see that. I mean, not in the epicness, but definitely in the way it builds a scene. I can definitely see that.
Comparison heavy now.
The cinematic nature of these songs. You can very easily visualize some cool scene work going on here. And I particularly like the visuals that the line, the cracks in blackout blinds cast patterns on the ceiling, but you're feeling fine. There's some double entendre going on here. There's some real black and white noir theme work coming through here.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. That's the difference, I think, in my opinion, between your Muse comparison. While we're entertaining that idea and that imagery, I feel like the type of cinematic nature going on here, opposite ends of the spectrum. Muse went for something that was very relatable, very very epic in scope,
grandiose. This is Sin City. This is
even more off the beaten track. This is something off IFC.
Yeah, pretty much. Moving on to the next track, which is one of my favorites on the early part of the record, which is Arabella. But the first time I listened to this track, so I had an issue with it. Not necessarily a bad issue, but an issue. The pre-chorus and chorus are more or less a blatant ripoff of War Pigs. In drum work, in guitar work, in bass work, sounds exactly like it.
Now, this band has actually said that they're big fans of Ozzy Osbourne and have drawn from Black Sabbath to get inspiration.
And this song is definitely an homage to that, as well as being its own thing. But it was also the first track on the record where I took notice of the lyrics.
Yes, I equated it to Eleanor Rigby meets War Pigs.
Well, that's the thing. That's the first thing that I noticed, actually, just before I noticed the whole Black Sabbath comparison. Because, yes, of course the guitar riff is you can't ignore it. I know we're playing a lot of comparisons here, but that's definitely something you cannot ignore in this track. But something that maybe you could ignore, but I'm not going to ignore, is the Beatles references.
Yeah.
It's hard to compare Ozzy Osbourne and John Lennon, but I almost feel like he was walking that line during that chorus there.
Yeah.
Right after, you get that guitar riff, which the music in scope is clearly Black Sabbath related.
Yes.
But then his style of singing, and even what he's singing, really seems to go back to Lennon or late Beatles stuff. It has to do with, well, just listen to the chorus. My days and when the sunset gets itself behind that little lady sitting on the passenger side, it's much less picturesque without her catching the light. The horizon tries, but it's just not as kind as her eyes. I feel like something about the romanticizing the innocent bystander here. That is something the Beatles did constantly throughout the end of their career.
Well,
you know, Penny Lane, Eleanor Rigby, exactly what you said.
There's also Think Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and the imagery involved in here, and then you get lines like, and her lips are like the galaxy's edge, and her kiss the color of a constellation falling into place.
Yeah, it's the style of their metaphors here, of Alex Turner's metaphors. It's the Helter Skelter. Also, there's a Helter Skelter reference in this. I mean, I feel like this is not something that was done by accident either. Arabella's got some interstellar gator skin boots. That's something I feel could easily come out of,
Let It Be.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that.
Maybe some of the later stuff as well. It
Maybe.
definitely has a lot of the lyrical work that you would come to expect with an old band, with a classic rock style, not first wave classic rock and roll, but the more, we keep saying it, the more Woodstock style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's definitely very apparent here.
Maybe even a little bit of Morrison. I mean, I love Jim Morrison.
We're going all the way down the comparison.
Well,
things here.
there is.
I think we could lump this a little more general now. I think there's a looser theme here at play, and that's just a reference to 60s era, 70s era rock.
Yeah.
The time when rock really burgeoned.
But also...
And in itself became an original entity, as opposed to sort of, the tool that you would find used for high school dances.
But also, just remember, you think this is comparison heavy now. The entire second half of the record is, like, loaded with things that are exactly like other things.
Kind of is a reference album.
It really is. And I don't think that's by accident. I really think that they're looking to... here are our influences. Enjoy, essentially, is what they're kind of going for.
It's funny, considering that the Alex Turner was quoted as saying, we've hit a stride with this album, and this album is actually where they want to be with themselves. It's funny that they use that opportunity to bring in all these outside influences in defining themselves.
But, I mean, that might really define them, yeah. That's what defines them as
But
these
in the
influences.
end, we want to stress, despite all this is a very original album.
Yes.
I'm not, despite the things that are incorporated, they're merely referenced. They're borrowing here and there. The end product is something that I really haven't heard before.
Right, and I mean, even like the next track, I Want It All, I immediately think of Queen, because the title of a Queen track. Even though the song itself doesn't really sound anything like Queen, that's the first thing I thought reading the name of the track.
This was a great breather track. It was less just a throwaway track, but meant to be an interlude. It was meant to be an expansion of the sound that we've been growing to hear, and kind of bring us a little bit more back to earth, because we were getting a little bit heavy with One for the Road and with Arabella.
And I called it a filler track you don't mind, because even though it kind of has shades of a filler track, it was still very engaging and even hypnotic in its own right. You weren't bored with this track by any means.
I think it had to do with the fact there was a lot of phasing going on in this track. That's always something that's sort of a little unsettling, if interesting.
Yeah.
It's unsettling, and that's clearly not by
It's
accident.
definitely attention grabbing.
Also, the fact that there's really no harmonies going on at all in this. This track is entirely sung in unison by members of the band. Perfect unison. It's a continuous melody throughout, and a continuous vamp. Really doesn't stray from that vamp at all.
Yeah.
This is why I think we interpret it as a filler track, because it does not have that chorus verse structure. Well, it's not as prevalent. It's not. You don't think about that first. You think primarily about the vamp itself.
Also, the idea of I Want It All, it's kind of curious that there's no naming going on. There's no real... The lyrics are very light, especially compared to the earlier tracks. This is about more the experimentation of the instruments, of really showcasing them, of giving you something a little bit fresher, a little bit newer.
Well,
it's that expansion that I think really speaks to the theme work of this album.
Since you started with the title, I mean, that's just it right there. I Want It All. This is a song about unquenchable desire. You can't exactly take that. I mean, yes, you can take it through a series of peaks and troughs, but on the whole, it's a very singular sensation, a very singular feeling, which is why the track seems fairly stagnant, but it succeeds in that way.
And also, I think it was really, now having heard the whole album, a great setup for the next track. It really is, I think, kind of the perfect breather before we got into...
Not even breather. I think it was a perfect unison from Arabella to Number One Party Anthem.
So this song, Number One Party Anthem, just a quick aside,
Oh boy.
me and Steve were talking about how, as we were listening before we recorded, that reading the track, we expected something from LMAFO, who are,
FAO.
whatever, who isn't even together anymore. I heard they broke up. Whoopee. But, you know, I really expected some kind of, like, fast-paced party jam song. And it was anything but.
Well, that depends on the kind of party you're thinking of.
I guess.
This was a party, though.
It was.
This was a despondent strip club montage. It was beautiful for the creepy, smoky, dirty vibe it created.
But to be clear, if you're just listening to the music on this track, if before you even notice the lyrics, which is how I first paid attention to it, it's just a beautiful Elton John-esque kind of piano rock.
That's just the thing.
Song.
I feel like you're taking it more from the lyrics, John.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously
Yeah.
that's true, but the thing is that's exactly what makes this track sort of ironic, because there's a distinct split between the lyrics and the music. The music is very unassuming,
Very loving.
It's the kind of thing you would find in like a 7 p.m. variety hour back in the 1970s. It's very family friendly, almost kind of campy in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's sweet because it
very
takes you
sweet.
back to that bygone time.
It's played in the bar at the Best Western, to some extent. But this is the best Western I've ever been at. Because it's got lines.
Now
it's
you're taking it too lighthearted. This is a stage thing. It's very distinctly stage
No,
hard to me.
I can see it as a lounge music to some extent.
It was more complex and
Musically.
advanced than that.
True, but musically I can see it fitting there. At the same time, I love how it speaks to the woman of this song and portrays her in such a great light, such a beautiful light, with lines like, "It's not like I'm falling in love, I just want you to do me no good, and you look like you could." It's really ironically beautiful. I think I'm using ironic wrong.
No, in this case you are using it correct. But
Yes.
that is exactly why I feel like, just to go back to music impressions here, that this does not belong in a Best Western Motel.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because the music really, to me, this is something that is meant for the stage. The stage of the era, not today's stage. Obviously, there's probably no stage out there, no show that would take this kind of track. It's a little bit dated.
Actually, no, I disagree. I think this would fit perfectly for a very specific kind of burlesque act. Actually.
It's almost made for it.
Yeah.
But
it's
see,
got-
that in itself, that would be taken in irony. That would be taken in jest.
Yes.
So then I'm talking about legit. There's no
Okay.
legit show out there that would take this seriously.
It's hard to-
Its
Well,
time has passed.
Okay, careful with the word legit, but any it wouldn't be taken seriously for the time.
Well,
Legit has nothing to
Variety Hours did not have irony in mind.
Right.
They had popular of the day, of the time, and that is what I'm talking
Well,
about.
I
That's
understand.
where it
it's
belongs.
hard to fit in a song that sings of lights in the floor and sweat on the walls, cages and poles, and fit it in a family fun hour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But
But
it's-
the music itself, you wouldn't know it.
It's just-
You would think it does.
I
I think a Muppet's going to pop out at any point in this track.
That would be
and sit on the piano with the with John
Elton
Elton
John.
John or
an
Rod Stewart, or
an
what have you.
incredible strip show. That would be an incredible strip show.
There
Just
you
having
are.
Grover pop out
There
of
you are.
places.
Well,
Yes.
I feel like that's been done before. Anyway, let's move on to another song that continues in this now slower, more beautiful theme work, where it's not as intense and in your face as the earlier part of the album was. Mad Sounds, a song that is the culmination of everything Velvet Underground-y. I kind of verbed them. This song,
Adjectived. that.
Adjective them. Sorry. So this song is clearly heavily influenced by the Velvet Underground, especially considering the way the lead singer sings on this track. And what I really loved about this track is it's just such an indulgent song, simply about enjoying music, getting these mad sounds in your head that make you want to dance.
It's not a dance song, though. That's the
Yes.
best part.
Yeah.
It is. If anything, it might fit in a slow dance setting, but it's really about how music can culminate and make you feel, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, especially after the Rod Stewart influences of the previous track, this Mad Sounds really solidified my idea that this is an album meant for the 60s and 70s, and in some extent a tribute to the whole era. And I think that's no more apparent than the very clear vocal stylings toward Lou Reed in this track. This is the quintessential Velvet Underground track, and I mean, it's appropriate, of course. He passed away recently, and this album was long since recorded, so it's kind of a strange tribute in that regard, but also because of the fact that the title of this album is referencing VU. I just don't think this is any accident.
No, of course not.
They're romanticizing this era, and yes, the fact that music had a way, especially that style of music, had a way of just soothing you, when you needed it most. It's a tribute to that.
And that's one of the things I really love, because truthfully, there's not a lot of songs that really talk about that I can think of off the top of my head, at least. I'm sure there are.
Very self-referential.
But this is very much a meta song, and it's very much an emotional song talking about listening to music and taking something emotionally out of it, which I love on every level.
I'm actually thinking back to the only other song I could think of is off one of the Flowbots albums, and the name is escaping me, but it's specifically about dancing.
Okay.
And the beat moving you.
Right. Well, there are other songs that were somewhat self-referential, like Lose Yourself to Dance is very self-referential, because it's a dance song talking about losing yourself to dance.
Yeah, it's a little loose at that point, though.
Right.
Almost a lot of dance songs are about dancing,
That's
because
true.
they're not really supposed to be about anything else. If they accomplish that, then great.
That's true.
Yeah. It's a little far to go from meta. But,
Okay.
I think the song is actually, it works on this album. It's a little bit, probably the most out of place, perhaps, on this album, in terms of style. But it's still in the same era. That's what we're talking about.
And it fits very well with number one party anthem.
And actually speaks to the next song, Fireside. Kind of unimpressive, to be honest. This was a little more towards the pop lines, but it was very catchy, very heavy beat, and did a great job of infecting you with the high energy.
Steve mentioned that it was very much, this sounded like a Chili Peppers song. Very much so. Especially with the way the drums
That's true.
came
It
in.
actually almost ruined my little arc here, but then they come straight back. Of course, yes, you have the drums and the bass. The way they mesh in the beginning is very Chili Peppers oriented, which is far from the 60s and 70s style. It's very fresh. But then during the chorus, they come right back with the whole shoo-wop, shoo-wop. It's like, all right, back we go. So clearly, there's an anchor here, even when they try to
And
modernize.
honestly, I don't mind this anchor because they do it well and they're doing it right.
Yeah.
I mean, wrong is kind of irrelevant, but they do it well. It's engaging and it pulls you in. This whole album is very much...
The filler is the wrong word, but I would call it along the same lines as I Want It All. It's meant to convey the idea and the theme work more than being a stand-out-ish track.
I Want It All is almost an interlude. Perhaps the only reason this track is a little bit weaker, Fireside, is just because, as I said, I Want It All was a direct message.
Yeah.
It was... It went after one thing, and it achieved it
And it
gloriously.
was supposed to be focused in that way, yeah.
This one is almost a little back and forth. It can be a little bit of a bore in the beginning until you get to that chorus, where they sort of cycle back and forth between the major 6 and the minor 4. That, to me, was sort of the driving force of this. But the rest of the track was a little weak.
But let's be clear, even though it was a little weak, it was still an enjoyable track, and engaging enough that it's enjoyable to listen to.
It also speaks to some theme work of the combination and the illusions music has with sex, with lust, and all the work that all the crossover that is between those two ideas, and how you kind of equate one with the other.
Yep. And this is where we really start to see, for the rest of the record, from this point forward, they kind of jump genre and even decades in some places from song to song. Moving into the longest track title on the album, Why Do You Only Call Me When You're High?
Onward.
Question mark. This song was a glorified pop track. In its essence, this is the pop song on the record.
It's witty, and I will give it that. It does have a...
Again, pop not to be demoralizing or as a bad thing. It's clearly a pop track. This is a radio track you could hear on any of the radios and, any of the pop top 40 radios.
I like the
Perhaps
concept.
perhaps in how blatantly fun it is.
Yeah.
The concept is great, but it's like... what was the nursery rhyme song we did recently?
Nursery rhyme song?
Jack be nimble, Jack be quick.
Oh, it was one of the Everlast songs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the title.
Me too.
And it has that wit.
Was it My Medicine?
My Medicine?
It was My Medicine.
Yeah.
Yes. It has that same sort of idea. I just really, to me, it complex in its complexity. It's very shallow.
Here's the thing. I mean, I can see your point there, and I think it's true. The fun nature of this track doesn't necessarily save it in a way. I wanted to like this track. I really did, especially considering they came up with a really nice meter for that. Why do you only call me when you're high? Like it's a nice idea, but I think it was the tone that really clashed with me here. The fun, uplifting tone, although it's still overlaid with the creep factor that is ever present here. You take that, and then you take the idea of a person asking, why do you only call me with your high? I feel like there's a separation there of emotion. On one hand, it's creepy and a little bit daunting, and on the other hand, I feel like that's a question of insecurity. I don't feel like they're really the same thing for me. It's kind of just using a pop, goofy structure to encase a relatively personal idea.
That's why I make the allusions to My Medicine, which was a nursery rhyme about drugs. It was a really conflicting idea.
Yeah.
I think My Medicine did it better, though.
Yeah, but also with this, my thing is that, I mean, Number One Party Anthem was similar in the vein that the song very much divined a family variety show sound, but the lyrics were anything but.
This is the reverse, though, and it was... I Want It All and Party Anthem are, to me, just more expansive and more beautiful in their complexities. I just don't get that in Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High.
I think, you know what, I have a theory here, because I think a lot of this track's weight is carried by the title itself.
That could be
That
it.
really is the grabber.
I mean, and also...
People read the title, it's meshed together in one, and they're like, whoa. Okay.
Well, also, when
that is a serious question. You have to wonder how he feels at that moment.
Yeah.
That's the depth of the emotion. I feel like the lyrics, the rest of the lyrics don't really do anything to aid that one emotion. You basically have it at face value.
Yeah, and with a title that long where you're essentially reading a sentence before you even get to hear the song, you're going to create a bias and idea before you even get into the song with a title that long.
Yeah, it's like you don't get the same, it's up in the air kind of sensation you get with the Number One Party Anthem. That could have been anything. We had ideas, we didn't get that.
Yeah.
Here, you get exactly what you were given.
Right. Moving on to the next track, Snap Out of It. So this song had a great kind of do it anyway, Ben Folds 5 feel, at least in the emotion the song's conveying. This kind of, get out there, wake up, what are you doing, kind of push.
It was presented in the duality of the verses and the choruses. The verses are more low-key, kind of explaining why the relationship this person's in is bad. Why are you hypnotized? Why are you still with her? And the choruses are the smack to the face, snap out of it moment.
Like the chorus is sang in a way where it's almost like you're grabbing someone by the shoulders and actually shaking them physically.
And that's in the line work.
Yeah.
I want to shake you. That's actually there, and it's really...
And that's a really strong imagery to present in the chorus.
But I didn't feel anger in that chorus.
No,
it's
but
not
shaking
anger.
Someone isn't anger.
It's intervention.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what
no, I
this is doing.
understand that. I understand that. It comes across as being a little bit lighthearted, though. maybe that's my one critique,
Yeah.
which is ironic because this is really my favorite track on this album. It is, but it's primarily for the verses. I noticed. If I do have a gripe, it is that separation between the verses and the chorus.
See, but I felt that with at least the lead back from the chorus into the verse, they were connecting instrumentation that really pulled it together.
I buy John's interpretation. I think that is exactly the reason why it went toward this.
Yeah.
You know, the duality of that approach
And
in
honestly,
intervention.
Though, if you think about someone shaking someone into a realization, like shaking someone until they realize something, it is a little lighthearted and comical. You don't actually physically shake people. That's not a thing that happens except in sitcoms.
Of course, but when it comes to my reasoning here, it really boils down to musicality. I think that it was building something very gorgeous as of the verses. Between the falsetto, his vibrato, I've thoroughly fallen in love with it by this point. It reminded me of As Tall as Lions, and then even though I wasn't as down with the choruses, even they managed to remind me of other things like NERD, Black Heart Procession. Granted, these are modern bands; they're not from the era, but what they were referencing, the same types of tracks that they did, were referencing things from that era.
But also the music instrumentation of the track also is very much like the piano, drums, and bass are very prevalent and mixed so well. I mean, the production value on this track is really great.
Yes.
And it's very standoutish, especially in the blend between the chorus and the verse. I think that's where you really see it.
It's not a blend though. It's a bold line.
Well, bold line, whatever. Connector. The connection though is within those instruments, I think.
It was back in Are You Mine that we really talked about the beautifully textured drum work and its complexity. This probably was the best percussion in the entire album, in my opinion. And it was very pointed and very simple by comparison. It was just it was nearly perfectly timed in those verses. It was just that good. And it probably, this album has some very interesting synthesizing work with the instruments, has great reverb aspects. It's got great whammy bars. All sorts of random things are getting thrown into here. They're really messing with the instruments. But in this song, it really had some of the most interesting changes to the actual tonal work of the instruments, and it was great.
Yeah, this track is definitely one of the best tracks on the album. I don't know if it's my personal favorite for reasons, but it's definitely one of the best made tracks on the record for sure. Even with the discrepancies Steve's talking about that aren't as impactful to me as they were to him. Which that kind of just boils down to taste, I think.
Still my favorite track on the album.
Yeah.
But, I'm definitely favoring the verses. That's clear.
It's okay.
Moving
it's the
on.
best musical moment on the album, I'll say that.
Moving on to the next track, track 11, Knee Socks. This one was, I wrote jaunty, but I don't really think that jaunty applies really, but it definitely had a very strong 80s sound, and this is the track that features Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age in the choruses.
Speaking of 80s, it was almost describing it's describing a woman walking around in her man's shirt and only her socks and everything like this. This was dirty sex.
But it's also 80s because what movie that came out in the 80s?
Exactly.
Risky Business.
No.
Yes.
No, not Risky Business. It's almost like a very dark version of Pretty Woman.
I guess, but I'm saying specifically the dress shirt and knee socks image is 80s because that was Risky Business.
But at the same time, of this really beautiful, smooth voice, you've got some really great contrasting guitar work, really harsh work that just does a great job to keep that dissonance in the song.
I really want to say at this point in the record, since we're almost at the end of it, the singer's got chops. He doesn't...
Oh, yeah.
His variety is within a very specific style, but there's still range there within that style. He doesn't really break from that style much, but he still can do a ton with it.
I'm returning to the Queens of the Stone Age comparison very briefly, just to say that I feel like he knows his boundaries.
Yeah.
I feel like he knows when to use his talents, which I think are especially his falsetto and his vibrato, and use them in such a way that when they come, they really hit it home.
Yeah, and it's one of those things of you don't have to be able to do any kind of singing to be a great or diverse singer. You just have to know your limits and play within them so well and make them your own.
You have to have an artistic vision.
That's why we like Justin Furstenfeld so much, because emotionally and stylistically, he knows exactly what he can do with his voice and does it.
The thing about this track, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as much as I did many tracks in this album. It's very steady, assertive, bass-driven, kind of candid vocals.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit less flowery, but straightforward, and I appreciated that. It was that strange interlude that was, I think, the real turning point for me, that brought this album brought this track to the next level, where the high falsettos come in. I'm not even sure, there could have been female voices in it, but then again, you know, with effects, who knows. But almost every single instrument drops out for them to jump in with this rap-like, this hip-hop vibe. It's, the lyrics there, you and me could have been a team, each and a half of a king and queen seat, like the beginning of Mean Streets, you could be my baby. That's it's a very interesting line.
When that breakdown came in is also when they introduced Josh Homme, who was singing with them.
It was more the meter in which that was played that was impressive to me.
It was also when they dropped all, like you said, all the instruments except for the hi-hat and the guitar. And it was a really interesting combination the way we were doing it, because this was one of the first times in the whole album we didn't have a heavy beat.
Yeah.
And it was really pointed.
I think that was the core moment in this track. I think that made this a little bit deeper in ambition than many of the other tracks.
I would agree. This was a very ambitious track in that moment, and I really liked it. And I think the featuring of Josh Homme really kind of wrapped the track up nice. I really liked his complimenting vocals, because they have a similar style and a different, I think, one step apart. The Arctic Monkeys singer, whose name I don't remember, is a little bit deeper than Josh is, but they play together very well.
And I think this is why I kind of regard the last two tracks, Knee Socks and I Wanna Be Yours, as a two-part ending. Because throughout this album we have a theme work of a night of debauchery, and Knee Socks does a great job of culminating it with the man and the woman together. But it doesn't end there. I Wanna Be Yours does a great job, in my opinion, of setting out an outro of truly discovering the desire to be no more in this, running around chasing loose women, but to actually become something more, to become a part of a relationship.
Well, what I want to say about I Want to Be Yours, though, is that, and this is a total compliment, it's not meant as an insult no matter how it says, it was laughably cliche in how 90s R&B it sounded, to the point where me and Steve were almost able to predict the flow of it. But that's great. I thought it was fantastic what they did with it, but it was so cliche.
Well, clearly you get to, by some standards, you get to... By some standards of criticism, you get away with certain things on your last track of an album. I mean, either it's going to be this perfect, well-rounded close to a wonderful arc, or it's going to be somewhat of a joke.
And I like that. I think that the fact that they don't take themselves that seriously.
We even got that, last episode with Everlast's version of Jump Around.
Right.
Whatever disagreements we may have had about it, that was definitely not a reason for me to really rate that album. It was it was his choice, the last track. This is their choice for this final track. I mean, in the end, yes, I probably do count it, because it is the last note that you leave people on, but you can get away with the joke.
And I like this. I like how different it is. It really kind of wakes you up at the end and goes, hey, we can do this too. Hey, eat this. And I did. I ate it up. I loved it. I thought the lyrics were great. I thought the vibe was great. I mean, all three of us by the end of the track were head bobbing. I mean, it had a very standard 90s R&B beat, but it was great. I loved it. I loved what his voice did with it too. I thought it was a great match. It was a little bit of a twist from the standard the R&B style singing you would hear, but still meter-wise fit the tone and beat very well.
And it had a great earnest nature to it. It was very much a heart-exposing kind of a song.
With lyrics that made no sense.
No, that's not exactly true. It's more like you discovered you're in love and don't know what to say, with lines like, I want to be your vacuum so I can suck up all your dust. Okay, yeah, that's kind of a weird metaphor, but you're fumbling. It's something new.
And we all know John is a fan of awkward metaphors anyway.
Yeah, I do enjoy wordplay, and they did.
And the worse, the better.
To whatever degree.
The bad metaphors are actually done ironically, and they do a good job in creating them.
Overall, I think it's a good conclusionary track. I don't know that it's the best one we've ever heard, but for this album, I wasn't expecting it, and I think that's why I enjoyed it so much.
Conclusionary. New words all around.
Conclusive.
We're just making stuff up now.
At this point, we have license to make up whatever we want.
Oh,
I do.
I always wonder with albums like these, because after you spend almost an hour going through words like meta and ironic and this and that, you have to really wonder like what it means in the end. I think what this is going to boil down to is that it was kind of just a fun album.
Yeah.
Something
that you enjoyed.
Rarely are we so simplistic about these things.
Just enjoying things, yeah.
Yes, it gets clever. And yes, it gets intriguing at times. These are the two things that I think really make it step outside of the box. And yes, that creep factor. Not every single album out there can pull off being creepy for an hour. In fact, that's back to the Stone Age discussion, is I think they tried in many ways. I just don't think they went all the way with it.
And I disagree now, knowing more about what Josh went through before recording
I understand
that record.
and I'm sympathetic to it. It either way, I still have my opinions. On
right, of course, absolutely. Well, since it sounds like you're surmising where you're headed with this, why don't you?
I got a rant. I'll rant in a minute. First, you can go first.
All right. So, I mean, this record, I agree. I think that Steve, for once, is making it very simplistic. We enjoyed the record. At its core, we liked it. Like, that's it. It as for all the meaning and all the
how does the old thing go? It's fun, and you can tap your head to it.
Yeah.
Like
tap your head, tap your foot.
Tap your head,
maybe
tap anything.
But no, I think that you're right, Steve. I think at the core of it, even though there's obviously more complex layers than that, at its core, it's just a good record that's enjoyable. I mean, it's definitely still, to me, not the best record we've heard this year, but it's by no means bad. It's definitely above average. It's even a little more than that. But, I mean, it's funny, because this is a record that you kind of have to pay attention to get it, though. Because when I listened to it the first time in the car, driving, I was only half paying attention, and it really hurt the record. Because when we listened to it again together, I really got it. I really understood it. I really knew where it was going.
And I was the same way, but I really enjoyed it, even though I wasn't paying too much attention to it.
Well, yeah, I thought that it was good in the car, but now I think it's very good.
It's got some onion layers you got to peel back a little bit.
Yeah, and honestly, I like that, because also you don't have to work that hard to get those onion layers. You just got to pay a little bit of attention, and I enjoy that. So, and there's no bad tracks. I mean, that's always a plus to me. If it's an album I can listen to from beginning to end, I like listening to albums. I do, in their entirety. So when you can listen to something from beginning to end, that always gets bonus points from me. Just on the simplest of levels, because that means I will enjoy all of it. No editing, no chopping it up, no making playlists. I just enjoy it at its face value, so to speak. I think for me, I was leaning towards a 4, but I don't know. I think it's a little more than a 4 because of just how much I enjoyed it and how really good it was. I don't think it was unbelievable. It's not They Might Be Giants level. It's not Steam Powered Giraffe level, because those things have that extra something, that brought it up above to either 4.5 or higher. But, honestly, the one thing that I didn't really get a lot from it, but didn't mind, was that I didn't resonate with it emotionally that much. There were moments where I did, but overall, I didn't have this huge emotional connection to the record. I liked it and I enjoyed it. I guess enjoyment's as good an emotion as anything, but it didn't make me feel a ton. It made me think, and I enjoyed it and I grooved to it, but it was more hypnotic than anything else. So actually, you know what? I think I'm going to leave it at a 4. If I connected emotionally, it might be a little higher, but me personally, because I didn't get that extra level of emotion that I have gotten from other albums like Blue October and other stuff, it's a 4 for me. It's a really good record, and I enjoyed it.
All right. I'm going to go on a little rant here. I won't be so simplistic about it, but I have some points about this album. At least personally. This album does kind of remind me of high school in a little way. For the innocence and all that other things. But I mean that in a positive sense in this context. Because some do compare that with immaturity, and a lot of people really hated high school anyway, so they hate the association. But that was not me. I actually have very fond memories of high school. So just for the age reference here, this is 02 to 06. Pretty much just gave my age away. So this is like early, mid-2000s. And in that era, this stuff dominated. This kind of stuff. This fun, indie kind of music. But that's because this was the answer to the whole 90s punk scene. So it's kind of ironic because in many ways, it's analogous to what I mentioned in the last podcast, or a couple weeks ago, about how New Wave in the early 80s was the answer to the overt prog and all the psychedelic stuff going on in the 70s. They wanted to bring back the fun element and not alienate anyone. Same deal here. 90s underground music, for all of its benefits, it was kind of getting a little broody. It wanted to bring back the fun element here. So, same with the 70s. You already know I kind of lean toward proggy stuff, but everything has its place, and I understand the reaction. I love tracing these movements from reactions, to movements. Now granted, it's not the mid-2000s anymore. It's 2010s, it's actually getting kind of scary to think that that's already a decade ago. But because so much time has passed, one might come to question whether indie music still really has to make the same point in this way. Which is a valid point because, well, I don't know. But to say that honestly, balls. Because this is incorporating modern elements, older elements, arranged in such a way that it comes off very fresh. So for that, it's actually a really striking piece of reference art, with the talent to back it. It's not a groundbreaking record, but it takes a style, and it nudges it just a little bit within artistic boundaries, and it's conscious and smart for being so. I would say I just summed up everything of what a 4 is. I can't really take it above that, but it's a damn good album. And definitely would recommend. I would even say buy, in fact.
We'll get to that. That's at the end.
All right, but I had to get that in.
I understand.
Because it's fun for everyone, literally.
Now, well, first off, I'm happy you guys liked it. I finally found an indie album, a recent indie album I enjoyed as well. Now, it's hard for me to add on what you two guys said, but there is a couple of points I'd like to make about the theme work, the arc of this album, because I haven't really talked about it, and I want to break it out now. There's two major arcs going on here. One is the idea of the night of debauchery. It starts as a guy trying to pick up girl, culminating with One for the Road, leaving the bar, going on with Arabella, and going, I want it all. So gotta go back out and party. Gotta hit that late night dive. Number one party anthem, Mad Sounds. That's that dive setting. And you go into it with Fireside, and it culminates with finding that special one for the night and realizing this isn't just someone you want to have one night stand with. I Want to Be Yours is talking about finally discovering a true relationship. It's a really interesting arc. On top of that, with the way we were describing each song, it goes from the 60s through to the 90s. This is an evolution in time as well. The earliest songs are the late 60s, early 70s, and as we go throughout the album, we're becoming more and more modern. That's an interesting concept in and of itself, and one I really didn't see until you, Steve, started really describing what eras they were drawing everything from. And it might have been accidental. I think it was a little meta. I love that sort of thing.
As I said, reference art.
Yeah, and to see it played out. There's only two songs that I really see as what we would call filler, and they're really useful and used in the concept of the art of the album as well. I really see this as a complete piece. So I got to be a little bit higher than you guys and go with a 4.25. This is better than Abandoned Pools, but it ain't They Might Be Giants. It really is enjoyable, and there's a depth to it that I just love in the ideas.
You bumped me. You're right. 4.25. I always change it once.
Yeah, you like to change.
Yeah,
I'll stay where I am.
I like hearing everybody.
I understand what John's saying, and I understand why Steve might bump it up, but the arc that you have, I didn't get it. Like, I got it. You explaining it to me, I get it, but listening to it, I just enjoy it. I don't get that extra level that you get from it.
I think I did pick up the reference art even after the first listen.
No,
it's a I can't ignore what the reference, and I like how they're able to tie all those different things. I mean, really, when you're going from Rod Stewart to Velvet Underground, to Red Hot Chili Pepper, I think it's amazing that you can take those three things and somehow combine it into an original entity unto itself. That's talent. That's serious talent.
And honestly, the arc of the Night of Debauchery, I get, but it wasn't as prevalent. But honestly, as a fan of music, the arc of going from old to new throughout the song, I kind of have to give it a lot of credit for that. That's really clever. Really clever, especially considering the way they ended it, and it made me laugh. Steve's right. This is a 4.25 because that arc is really strong, and I can't.
It's very subtle too. That was the cool part about it,
and that's why I think I have to bump it up that 0.25.
It always depends
also.
on how you look at it, because a lot of times I feel like I've given 4s for being like, it barely makes it. It barely makes it into the definably good.
But you're right.
I don't want to say this is a barely.
The arc is really strong, so I'll bump it up to a 4.25 across the board.
There you go. I guess the only reason it doesn't go higher for me is like you almost want that other. You want more spine tingling sensations, and I do get that in moments. I do get that in moments here.
Everything is solid in this album. The guitar work, the bass work, the drum work, the electronic work, the vocals. Everything is solid, but you only really get glimpses of something greater.
Right. Whereas in those albums we mentioned before that were 4.5 and 5, they're
perpetually greater.
Yes. I mean, looking at all of the theme work in Steam Powered Giraffe or They Might Be Giants. I mean, again, They Might Be Giants still stands, and this will lead us into our little bit of a mini retrospective we're going to do. One of my favorite moments in the history of this podcast is, and I got to tell this too, I actually met the wife of John Flansburgh, Robin, who is a very sweet woman who I got to hang out with, who's good friends with Sarah. I got to tell her that one of my favorite moments in the history of this podcast, and one of the only reasons I miss listening to the album for the first time together, is because when we heard Darlings of Lumberland for the first time, it was the only time in the history of this podcast we were all completely speechless and our mouths were physically agape. We didn't know what to make of it.
It wasn't just Darlings. It was those short 30-second clip songs.
Darlings was really
Hive Mind.
But Darlings was what really did it because we had no idea what the hell to make of that.
Yeah, it was
initially.
It was a fusion of like 40 different genres.
It had to do also with its placement on the album.
Right after Replicant.
It's just like John said. There's a lot of little ditties on that album. When you get so many of those, you don't expect something as
massive.
Powerful.
Yeah. And so and this leads and that moment leading into our discussion about how this podcast kind of evolved. We want to talk a little bit about it and where we're going. That moment kind of began this evolution of the podcast. We realized after that, as great as that moment was, we really need to give albums more of a fair shake. We're not giving them enough attention by only listening to them once.
Yeah, we started off just trying to discuss something for an album, and
we started off exactly this way. We'd listen to an album together, and we'd try to discuss first impressions. And we could do a decent amount with those first impressions, but at some point you almost felt like you were reaching.
And some of the albums it didn't really matter. Like for Maroon 5, first impression, 10th impression, that album was going to stink no matter what.
Yeah,
but
true.
With stuff like Queens of the Stone Age and some other bands, multiple listens lend to understanding the record better. Listening only once, you just don't really get it.
I can confidently say that due to the technicality of Godsticks and Visits Conundrum, I made you guys listen to it ahead of time.
There was no way.
There
was no way we would have gotten everything from that record on one listen alone.
And that's actually why our podcast has gotten to be an hour and a half to 2 hours now.
And why it's actually longer.
It's really kind of funny. We're actually pretty early today.
Yeah. This album was a fairly concise discussion.
In a long time.
But also, the thing is, I felt in the beginning, and this comes from me being a creature of habit with being a podcast listener, as well as a podcast maker, is you want to try and follow other formats, but the reality of it is you're not going to find your true format until you just do it. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
And
we tried. We shoehorned in news. We shoehorned in what music we're listening to segment. We shoehorned in these segments that were okay, but never felt right because we were doing just that.
We've whittled down news because in the end, there are just so many sources, so many endless sources.
And we were just pulling from other sources that people are already looking at.
In fact, the only reason I even brought it to the attention Lou Reed's death is because it seemed to be very appropriate to this album right here. So if something's appropriate... There you go.
I want to go out on a limb, not on a limb, I want to go out and say we're dedicating this episode to Lou Reed.
There you go.
I want to dedicate this episode to Lou Reed, who is an incredible musician and so important to the history of music.
I had many good fond memories of sitting in my suite, listening to my friend David try to impersonate Lou Reed, and pretty well, actually. Playing Lou Reed songs in the suite was very... Considering all of our buildings were built in the 1960s, let's just say I felt like such a tool.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
You know, it was
right.
It was an experience to behold.
But it's interesting that we really have tried to become more technical. It's more, we realized how places like Metacritic will be looking to do one-line renditions, and that's just not good enough when discussing music.
Right.
You cannot be satisfied with, oh, this was good, this was bad. That doesn't explain anything.
Well, also
and you realize that you can't do that in an hour. You can't do that in 45 minutes. You got to take your time, whatever time it is. If it takes 10 seconds, if it takes 2 days, to properly explain why a song is good, or why a painting's good, or why any form of artwork is good, you have to find the right words.
And you also need to discuss. You need to incorporate other people's ideas.
And honestly,
I don't think you can be an entirely introverted experience.
Right. Well,
I truly believe that you need other people.
Well, yeah. Well, and also the thing about this podcast, especially that I've discovered as we've added things like the Spotify playlist and linking the Spotify playlist, so you can listen along, really changes and impressed upon this solid format of breaking it down track by track, which is something that, like, I've loved. Some of my favorite moments on the podcast are when we're breaking the album down track by track. People, because it could have been any one of us, is set in our way of, oh, this record was X. But by the time we get to the end, we lean over to Y. You know, or even in our wrap-ups. Like, I brought Steve around to Eve 6 because of how I explained it in my comparisons. And those things are stuff that are not... that if we didn't go so in-depth and really discuss, we'd never get to. It's the fact that we break it down on such a molecular level, musically, and even, you know, album-wise. I think that's why we've found this kind of groove, and the content has expanded, and it has gotten longer. Is because we can't just go, this was good, that was bad, this was good, because music has so much opinion influence, but the reality is what's good and what's bad can only be spoken by a technical level, because, you know, if Nickelback, whether you love them or hate them, they make money and they make music. Whether you think it's good or bad, part of that is opinion. Some of it's skill level, and some of there's fact in it. But the reality of it is, saying someone sucks is not explaining anything. And we try to never do that.
Here's a question. Food for thought. Do you think that in the future we will inevitably get longer and longer and longer as we look more deeply into things? Or do you think we'll cap at some point, as one does with an album that is the same length? Or, further still, do you think there'll be a learning curve and we'll look back on ourselves and become more concise with our ideas?
I think for the time being, we're probably at a very stable level of how we explain things.
I think that will all depend on the albums we're reviewing. I feel that every week it's different. The length has... Because we're not a steady length. We're somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours on the regular. But between guests, new genres, old genres, you know, Bare Naked Ladies to Nine Inch Nails, depending on the band, how complex the record is versus how simplistic the record is. And even then, sometimes the records that stink, we go even longer on because we have so much to say about it. Whereas the album, like this week's album, the reason it was so much shorter is because this album was really good. It was really, really good. But it
You had to
wasn't...
work on that, didn't you?
It's in the sweet zone of 3.75 to 4.5.
Where there's less to say because we really liked it. Whereas when we really love something or really hate something, it's more passionate and more vehement than just liking something.
That's probably true. I think it also, the reason we may have capped and were stable for the time being is because of the way most albums break up their album into tracks, perhaps 12 or 15 tracks. This is why we talk about each and every track, you know, track by track, and then come to a conclusion at the end.
Yeah.
But we haven't done that with everything.
Well,
For instance, Flying Lotus, we couldn't do it because the tracks were so brief that really it's purposeless to break down each and every... You know, if you have a 45-second track, which is almost that of a soundbite, it's not really meant to be broken down.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, I said a couple times, is considered a curiosity. you throw it in, and discuss sound bites as sound bites for exactly what they are.
And it's
Conversely, you also have, the trilogies, like the Border Stomp trilogy on Godsticks and Visit's Conundrum. I mean, you have to discuss that as a solid entity. You can't talk about
it was meant to be broken into 3 parts track-wise, but it was one thing.
You can mention things here and there about them.
It was a movement
right.
at that point.
Exactly. For instance, if we ever did a symphony, we'd probably talk about them as movements.
Yeah, well, that's like what we've been toying with, and in the future we're going to have Nate back on from Average Intelligence and talk John Williams. That's the plan going forward.
With any luck, John Williams would do a movie, and we'll be able to use a new soundtrack.
But, that won't be till the new Star Wars, and that's next year, I think.
So we're going to have a vote system and just pick the best one we can
But my
come
point
up
with that is, when dealing with something by John Williams, I mean, with Jurassic Park, I can almost see it being broken down track by track, but something like Star Wars, you can break it down track by track, but that score, that's a piece. That's beginning to end. It's all meant to be...
In many ways, you might not even break it down in movements. It's just, it's an entity you have to... We would take it as it comes, honestly.
Yeah, that's exactly how it would go.
Right.
And so, I think you're right. I think as we continue to do that, and it's funny because Flying Lotus still in the history of all of the podcasts is the only one we didn't do it track by track.
Yeah.
But there may be more than others. I agree with a symphonic piece. We may not be able to break it down track by track.
Green Day, we didn't do it actually track by track. We did this track and that track.
Well, because we also hated it.
Let's put it this way: if you have a series, I think actually same may have been true with Maroon 5. I'm not positive about that, but if you have a series of trivialities, you realize they do achieve the same exact end. I feel like you can... It depends on how you look at an album. We do kind of favor the album that has some semblance of arc or connection between the... I think just the days when you could put a sporadic collection up there, unless you call it a collection,
Right.
It's just not how
I still feel like even a record that's a collection of tracks, as long as there's something, there has to be a something. And what I mean by a something is something besides... just music at its basis level. You need to give us something else.
Right. So, for example,
in it.
Meet the Beatles is a group of love songs. That's all it is. I love the album. It's not nearly the same quality, and not because it's early Beatles, but because it really has nothing to unify it.
Same with Please Please Me and a lot of the early stuff.
Yes, and it wasn't until
Whereas the later stuff
that it started becoming a real piece. Rubber Soul...
the White Album,
Magical Mystery Tour.
Well, that's just the thing. The
where
White
they
Album
became stories.
The White Album
was a collection of songs.
Yeah,
it is a collection of songs. In many ways, they were turning back on themselves by doing a collection. It's almost a list of B-sides.
Yeah.
Well, it's the esoterica of the Beatles.
Well, a lot of people call White Album their favorite album. For me, it's not because of that exact same reason. Whether you put the Beatles on a pedestal or not, I would still judge it in the same exact level. I think for that reason, the White Album is not the best album of the Beatles.
No, I agree.
Because,
no, my favorite's either Magical Mystery Tour or Revolver.
Yes, Revolver is one of the albums.
Just making sure. My mind
sure.
was putting... No, Revolver, I think, might be one of my favorite records.
Sgt. Pepper's easily mine because of the unified concept nature. I mean, Sgt. Pepper's the antithesis of White Album.
Yeah. Well, White Album has all of my favorite songs by the Beatles, but it's really not the best album.
See, that's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay.
But anyway,
that's actually an important point. Bringing up the White Album, something I want to get to. Another thing we haven't done that I'd like to do is the next band, whoever it is that we all enjoy, that comes out with the greatest hits. I want to review the greatest hits. Why did they put? Are the hits list? Because not all greatest hits are listed numerically, like by year when the hits came out. Some jump around or are completely shuffled, and
they try to arrange
the Red Album and Blue Album by the Beatles.
Right, and so I'm curious to review greatest hits.
The Beatles one album, you mean, right?
No, the Red Album and the Blue Album. They had two albums that were specifically colored, same cover, but one red, one blue, and one was the first half, one was the second half.
And so for me, I'd be interested to see, because when you put out a greatest hits, besides the new tracks, if they include one or two new tracks on a greatest hits, which a lot of bands do now, it's really about the production. The track, why would listing the tracks as random versus in order? Why? Do they go better that way? Do they not? Do they complement each other? Do they don't?
I'm going to show you...
That would be interesting, actually.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting.
On the face of it, it could seem a little trite, but I would like to take that challenge.
Yeah.
Without it being covers like Everclear?
Right. Well, because Everclear released the greatest hits, but they covered themselves. They re-recorded all of their hits.
Yeah.
And no. Last week, Well, not last week.
Oh, Everlast you're talking about.
Everclear.
Well, because Everclear
and
yeah.
Everlast.
Well, Everclear
Yes.
actually did do that. Everclear released an album
Everlast-
about a year or two ago where they covered themselves. They re-recorded all their songs.
Why?
Everlast
I
was akin to a greatest hit, but it was a group of covers.
Yeah.
Which is not the same thing.
Yeah, it's not a production album where they just pluck the songs off the albums and put them on a collection.
Right. Well, those recordings that he made that were fresh. So
Yeah.
it
Right,
still
that's why it wasn't
had
a
nothing
greatest-
behind it.
I
It's
will
in the
say
same vein.
we are back to our old habits because we've gone completely off topic.
Well, we do that too, and that's another reason why our format's
Why?
expanded,
Well,
actually.
then bring it back for us.
Yeah,
John.
that's the other thing. I think we actually try to adhere to topics a lot more readily, and because of that, we also try to go for deeper. I think just in some self-deprecating, we really had no idea what we were doing those first 10 weeks.
Well-
we were still trying to feel it out, so we were coming up with just anything that comes to mind, like greatest soundtracks, greatest albums.
had
Like
some-
we didn't know what we were doing.
The thing is, because we were also fresh and we had fresh ideas and all the early
We were
stuff,
test
the
driving a
goodies,
lot of
the
it.
really goodies, the ones that like we wanted answers to most immediately, they are in the beginning. So some of our early topics are not to sneeze at.
Right, but one of my favorite things about the early episodes is I still, to this day, to me personally, which episode I think is the most god-awful episode we've ever put out. And I actually had a conversation with Alon about this recently. We were hanging out for my birthday back on October 12th. Yeah, my birthday. 30 now.
He's 30.
We talked about how the first time we had the Wall Street Players on, because we didn't know what we were doing, and we had a guest on the second episode, it was awful. The mixing, like the editing was terrible because I was still editing and we were recording on an iPad. It was a train wreck. But it's because we were trying something new, and I don't regret it, but it was a train wreck.
It's still very much a holding on for dear life, trying to make sure that we actually do the things we're setting out to do kind of a situation. It wasn't.
6 people surrounding an iPad. You're
And
gonna
we're
test?
all-
Nope.
No.
We're all even. How does that sound? I don't know. It sounds.
find out.
It makes noise.
It has a sound.
Yeah.
It does, that is
I'm sure the
correct.
microphone will hear us somehow.
It was a little sad, but we've come a long way.
We have. And we're going to go even deeper with this on our year-end wrap-up, which should be a doozy this year. We've got plans for it.
We actually, we're not going to be doing an album review. We covered it last year, and I had so much fun doing a Christmas album that I kind of made them not do one. We're not doing one.
Still want to do one.
I know you still want to do one.
Maybe I'll
You
do it in
can-
writing. Maybe I'll do it in writing. I don't know.
Okay.
You could.
But
That's another thing that I want to talk about also, just briefly, is a promise for next year is, obviously, if you found this through iTunes, you haven't been to our website. We have a website, also of the same name, crashchords.com, which is where the podcast originated before we were on iTunes. We also did this thing where we wrote articles for the website, which we don't do anymore, or very sporadically. In the coming year, I want to do more with that because I would like to tie in the website and the podcast more neatly, have more variety, give you more. Again, when I mention donating, I mention it because we want to do more with the site, and it's not free. And we're trying to do the best we can with free stuff. But again, we ask for donations because the money you give will go directly into making the podcast better. And it's because we want to do more with this. We want to be more than just a blog roll and an iTunes page. We want to do more, give you a music experience. And next year, I really want to work on that.
Yeah, we're really kickstartering this. We want more, and not because we want more. We want to give you guys more, the listeners, because we love doing this. Honestly,
Hey, truthfully, if no one listened, we'd still do this every week.
yeah, we would. We so would.
Because it's just fun.
Yeah.
I don't want more. I want it all, to quote today's track.
Yeah,
You
of
want
course
it
you
all.
do. But we can always get better equipment. We can always get more space. We can always try to get more writers actually giving you quality content. We can get more people on the podcast. People you like. People you
This
know.
is an
People
op-
you don't
People
know.
you like.
People you don't know, never heard of, and will fall in love with. Because some of these people I have. If I've fallen in love with their music, we want that. We're trying to make the world a better place in our own way. We really are. Don't laugh.
It's
But
funny.
we really are.
It is a corny
No, I
line.
just
it's-
love how that we seep from a topic into a self pitch.
No,
Yeah, well.
we really do.
Well, I mean, technically, if you're already listening, you like us, or at least I hope. But no, I mean, I really want to do more with this. I mean, this is not a career now, but maybe someday it will be. But it's definitely something we enjoy doing.
I'm one of those people that loves it when somebody else loves the things I love. And I
Oh,
know
yeah.
I said the word a lot, but to have somebody have a spark of the same feeling.
I love that too.
Just a spark of that feeling where you just are so full force in the same way I am is just amazing.
Well, I'll bring it around back to music. Is I got that experience. So obviously, I had mentioned I was obsessed with Schaefer's new record, "Sick Passenger," which is available on iTunes and his website, his Bandcamp.
He gets a plug too.
But no, seriously. So I was obsessed with this record, and I listened to it a ton of times before I had played it for anyone else that I knew. And so then me and Sarah were driving together, and I played it for her because I really wanted to hear it because I loved it so much. And she fell in love with the record as much as I did. She really liked it a lot, really got what I was saying about it, and really enjoyed it. That made me really happy. It's that spark of when you can share something with someone and they enjoy it as much as you do. That's one of the best feelings in the world. And for me, getting that through music is my favorite.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to say here is we're not the goal of this podcast is not to tell anybody what to think. They're not those kind of reviews in that sense. They're really more analytical. It's discussion about the whole of something as a product.
Well,
the highs, the lows, and whatever number we tack on it at the end is really just going to come down to our opinions. But we do try to address all of the devil's advocacies.
And that's why we wrote those articles about our rating system, so you have a better idea of why we say what we say. But also, before I forget, to wrap up our album of this week, Arctic Monkeys, AM, 4.25 across the board. This is a purchase. This is not a burn it, a listen to it. This is a purchase. You know, just about anybody who likes music will get something from this. You'll enjoy it. So definitely go out and buy this record. It's definitely worth your money.
I think it's a pop your city in a car and ride to it kind of album. That's
it's definitely a commuting album.
Road trip album.
Yeah.
I could see that.
For me, driving, very active listening time.
Me too.
A lot of people think it's passive because you got to focus on the road. But if you're a good driver, you probably have that down to a second.
Obsessed with that Schaefer record. I dissected it, listening to it, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
You guys should really pay more attention to the road.
Thanks, John.
I'm just saying.
Wait, of the three of us, who in this room has been arrested?
That is besides the
point.
He
called you out.
I was arrested over an out headlight. Like, that's just silly.
It is silly. But I think this is a good place to kind of start wrapping up. We're definitely going to get more in depth into where we're going and what we're doing with the podcast and the website. Thank you for listening as always. Question, comments, want to give ideas? crashchordsblog@gmail.com.
And as always, we're going to close with two things. One is going to be our next album, and two will be the spam mail from Steven.
So while Steve prepares that, I do want to put out there that also comments on the website, we do see them. Feel free to tell us what you think. Reach out to us.
And one thing I want to talk about, besides we keep asking for albums, like suggestions that way, and we will more than happy do something like that. I would also like if there's anything you want us to talk about, because we come up with all these topics, and some of them are duds, and most of them I think are awesome because they're my ideas. But we really want to know what you would want our opinions on, not just on an album scale, but how we view certain topics. We would more than be more than happy to actually wax eloquence on something of that such.
And to that effect also, I'm going to actually speak directly. I'm talking to you, Robbie and Maya, since I gave you a shout out earlier. Send us an album suggestion. If you have an album you want us to review, if we get fan suggestions for albums, we will do fan episodes. We will review those albums. We haven't gotten any yet, but we definitely will. That's what spawned the guests bringing their own album choice. And it's a fan recommendation.
And if it's an album that we really don't like, we won't mention your name. This way, you're not embarrassed.
I don't know that that's true.
Well, except for some of my friends, because I would totally embarrass them.
Anyway, Steve, what do you got for us this week?
While everyone wonders about John's arrest. Woolrich Bibbs venite a conoscere e prendere per ricorre di questa famosa terra di Wild, Pennsylvania, din igre elder rocker arganska kinda verdrivet, by Woolrich Online.
That was an excellent accent. I was very impressed with the vocal work. Very impressed. I would have been more impressive if there was better harmonies.
It was kind of soulless.
Harmonies? I am not a Mongolian throat singer. I cannot do self-harmonies.
Which would be really cool.
It would be really cool. All right.
I did test once. I managed to get one note down.
That's pretty good.
It took an hour of practice.
That's pretty good.
Of course it did.
Wait, unless you got another hour on the podcast.
Yeah, that's not.
That's okay.
I can work on it.
We're good. No, we're good. No, we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Anyway,
Anyway, what's your pick for next
Not
week,
into it.
Steve?
Next week, we are going back to Prague. This is a little more of a straightforward Prague than perhaps the Godsticks idea that I introduced to you back in podcasts 051. But this is something a little bit more... It incorporates a little bit more metal, perhaps.
Ooh.
But it's really gonna be kind of technical. And I believe most, if not all, of this album is going to be instrumental.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
Yep. I don't think we've had too many full instrumentals before.
Boards of Canada are the only one so
Boards
far.
of Canada, perhaps a couple of others.
Halo.
And Pacific Rim.
And, oh yeah, so
We've had a few.
Flying Lotus. Okay, all
We've
right,
had a few.
fair enough. A rock, then. Rock-wise.
Rock instrumental. We haven't done anything
Rock
by
instrumentals.
Trans-Siberian Orchestra yet, correct.
That would be an interesting little adventure.
We'll get
All right,
there.
so the name of the album, the name of the band, Scale the Summit. The name of the album, The Migration.
Scale the Summit. I like that as a band name. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for this week. So remember, as always, music is life, and life is good.